They were clinically dead. No pulse. No brain activity. No chance of return. And yet, they came back. Not just alive, but transformed. They remembered everything. And what they brought back might be the most compelling proof science can't ignore. What if everything we believe about death is wrong? The moment the heart stops, blood drains from the brain. And science says that should be the end. But thousands of people around the world are saying something different.
I realized that I could even see my physical body.
I had that whole white light thing.
We were able to also identify the mechanism by which this experience occurs, which is that as the brain shuts down, because of a lack of blood flow in death, the normal braking systems in the brain are removed. This enables people to have access to their entire consciousness. And interestingly, they get access to other dimensions of reality as well.
In this film, you'll meet the doctors, the scientists, and the ordinary people who crossed the threshold and returned. Not just to tell their stories, but to show us what it really means to live. Medically speaking, death begins when the heart stops. Within seconds, blood flow to the brain ceases, and in less than 20 seconds, brain waves go flat. By all definitions, consciousness should vanish, but some people report the opposite. Vivid memories, full awareness, while their brains show no signs of life.
The AWARE-2 study was the world's largest study and most comprehensive study examining what happens to the human brain and mind and consciousness as people transition from life to death when they're going through cardiac arrest resuscitation. The study was carried out in more than 25 hospitals in the United Kingdom and the United States, and we examined 567 patients. The study was able to show for the first time that the experiences that people have been describing about having a lucid, hyper-conscious experience where they can reevaluate their entire life, every memory, every thought, every intention, is real and is different to hallucinations, is different to dreams, and is different to other imaginary experiences.
Science calls this impossible, but near-death experiencers call it truth.
I popped out of my body. I was no longer attached to my body, and the pain was completely gone. I was so detached that I then noticed that I was up on the ceiling of the room that I was in. And I was looking down at the scene below me, and I could see my body lying there on the gurney, but I could see that my essence was no longer a part of that body, that it was just the shell of who I am. I saw the people around me scurrying around. I felt their various emotions of being frightened, being bewildered, wondering what was happening, moving into action, assessing. And I just looked at this strictly from an observer's perspective. I was just noticing and almost taking note of what was going on.
I popped out of my body, frozen, cold, shivering, shaking. And in a minute, what I call a moment of no time, I'm now in a tunnel and I'm looking around and I'm not cold. I'm not freezing. I can breathe. I'm in a body, but I don't recognize the body. And I look around and I see down as I'm looking over to the left, I can see down at the bottom of the lake, there's my body.
These aren't hallucinations. Hallucinations are random. These experiences are structured, detailed, verified. Even more astonishing, many recall seeing scenes far from the operating room.
We know that in cardiac arrest, there's no function of the brain anymore. So the clinical death, which is called the period of unconsciousness, when the heart doesn't function anymore and the breathing stops, you will die within 5 to 10 minutes if there is no CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation started. All patients will die. So it's the process of dying, really. And we know that the clinical findings in those patients, they have no body reflexes anymore. That's the function of the cortex of the brain. There are no brainstem reflexes anymore. So no gag reflex, no corneal reflex, and wide dilated pupils. There's no breathing anymore. The breathing center is close to the brainstem. And when you measure the electrical activity of the brain, after an average of 15 seconds, it's a flat line. And the average time needed to resuscitate patients is at least 60 to 120 seconds or more. So all those patients in our study and all the other prospective studies of survivors of cardiac arrest must have had a flatline EEG and a non-functioning brain. And in this very moment, they had an enhanced consciousness.
They Narcaned me 3 times and got me in a, started more IVs, got me in a head down situation and got me up to intensive care. And she said they couldn't get a blood pressure. It was 40/0 was the best they saw. And sometime during the night, I left my body. And there's no doubt about that when a person goes through that. It's not your imagination or a dream.
One of the most compelling cases is that of Anita Moorjani, declared near death from end-stage cancer. She experienced a profound awareness far beyond the body.
I had end-stage lymphoma. I had end-stage cancer and I was dying. I was on my deathbed and the doctors said I won't even make it through the night. And I went into a coma. And in this coma is when I experienced the other side. And some of the most beautiful things that happened to me is that I felt my dad was there to greet me because I was aware that my body was dying. My body, up to that point, had been in so much pain and so much fear and so much discomfort. But now in the coma, I was outside of my body and I felt amazing.
Her body was failing, her organs shutting down. Yet her awareness was more vivid than ever. And when she returned, her cancer began to vanish. If the brain was silent, who was watching? If the heart had stopped, who was remembering? What if we are more than the body? What if consciousness doesn't end with death?
They are very, very strong evidence for the fact that you can continue to think and feel and perceive and make decisions when your brain is not functioning. It suggests that the mind can function without the brain, which is kind of counterintuitive because in normal life, it seems like the mind and the brain are the same thing. The mind is what the brain does. When you get intoxicated, that affects your thinking. But in exceptional circumstances like a near-death experience, when the brain seems to be shutting down, the mind seems to be freed up to experience a far wider range of consciousness than normal.
Philosophically, I was an atheist. Hardcore. You couldn't convince me otherwise. And with my work, just really reinforced that, because I can cut a brain and I can put it out for you. And I'll ask you, where's consciousness? Where's the soul? This doesn't exist. There's no proof for it in this brain. I was able to see everything around me, 360 degrees. And I see it, but more of experiencing it more than seeing it. I knew that my wife had been pulled out. I knew it was a yellow kayak. I knew it was the guy down the river. I knew my son was in the other boat. I knew the boat behind me was coming to get me. I knew that I had a family member that was going through a very difficult personal crisis that I didn't know about, that I knew about, and I knew it was going to be okay. So that was very sort of happening while I'm in this light situation. And there's this incredible overcoming feeling of love and a voice saying, they're going to be okay. So I get really emotional still, not because it's upsetting, but because I'm in that moment of that beauty. It was just so beyond experience.
I started feeling as though I was being pulled into a tunnel going backwards. And that's when I realized, I'm actually dying. And what happened was I was in such a weakened state that my body couldn't really handle the sudden rush of morphine and my heart stopped. And I could hear on the monitor behind me my own heart flatline. And then I began to get very scared because I could see nurses running into the room, but I was seeing them from the kind of the end of a tunnel that kept getting longer and longer. But as they rushed into the room, their fear, their emotion of fear combined with mine washed over my physical body and kind of reignited my physical energy. And I felt myself coming back down the tunnel and coming back into my body. And that was the first moment where I really began to leave and really began to have the near-death experience, the out-of-body experience. The next one would come the next day.
What's remarkable about near-death experiences is that they shouldn't happen. Many of them are associated with a cardiac arrest, which means your heart stops beating like a heart attack. The moment your heart stops beating, of course, immediately blood stops flowing to the brain. 10 to 20 seconds after that event, the EEG or electroencephalogram, which is a measure of brain electrical activity, goes absolutely flat. There is no measurable brain electrical activity. It should be impossible to have any kind of conscious memory at that point in time, and yet, literally by the thousands, people have reported near-death experiences under those circumstances.
I really felt incredible. I felt free, and weirdly, even though my body was dying, I felt alive, like liberated, alive and free. It was just the most incredible feeling I can ever describe. I was able to see my physical body lying there on that hospital bed, but my body looked so small and insignificant compared to how I was now feeling.
Darius J. Wright didn't imagine the afterlife. He experienced it through a spontaneous out-of-body journey. He returned with insight into what lies beyond the veil and why consciousness never truly dies.
Once you are outside of the body, the moment when you leave the body, your soul holds physicality. Your soul is physical. It's not an airy-fairy experience. It's actually more real and more physical than what we live right here, right now, because we all have a limited access to the light spectrum. Our physical brain could decode, which is like 1% of the light spectrum. So when you leave the body, your soul is accessing more of that light, more of the all of the light spectrum. So it is more real than what you could ever experience here. So much so when you leave, you look at your soul and you start rubbing your hands and you're like, wow, this is the true state. This is my divinity, because that is your true home. That is your true body that is never corrupted or can never die.
With more and more cases, including verifiable observations, details confirmed by witnesses or hospital staff, the question deepens. Are these visions imagined or evidence of a deeper reality?
The medical record was entirely clear. There was no question at all. This guy was as dead as you can be without having his heart stop. His brain, he had a terrible infection, a rare infection of his brain that had a less than 1% chance of survival. And if he survived, there was virtually no chance that he would be functioning again. The CAT scans showed his whole skull filled with pus. You couldn't really see the wrinkles in the brain. It was all filled with pus. And he had what's called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is a clinical scale doctors and nurses use to measure brain function. And that's done like 3 or 4 times a day during his entire hospital course. And his was very, very low, showing very minimal brain function all the time he was there. And yet he had this near-death experience, a very deep experience. And there were a couple of times during his 6-day coma in which he saw things going on in the hospital, in his hospital room, when his Glasgow Coma Scale showed that he was having virtually no brain function at all. And when I talked to people who were involved in his care, the things he described seeing were corroborated by them. He saw them accurately at times when his brain was not able to function.
I remember hearing these stories that people were saying, and it felt like one consciousness. And I heard, my mom's got cancer, please God, don't let her die. And I heard, I'm going to turn 16 and my dad won't get me a car, please God, make her get me a car, or make him get me a car. When I was hearing all kinds of just interesting prayers, desires. And I looked over at the angelic realm and I asked them, do you answer all those? And they said, oh no, Susie, sometimes what people desire the most isn't good for them.
When they went to give me the anesthesia, I had some kind of horrible allergic reaction and it stopped my heart. And I actually died for what the surgeon said was 7 minutes until they could bring me back. Well, during that 7-minute period, I went to the other side where we all go to when we cross. And I met my spirit guide who took me on, all I can say is it was like some kind of a tour.
The doctors had held a family conference where they said I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to a 2% chance, but with no chance of recovery. That's why they were recommending stopping the antibiotics, letting nature take its course, letting me go. And of course, they protected Bond from the worst news during that week. And when he overheard this, he knew things were much worse than he'd been told. He came running down the hallway, pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking over there, one over there, neither pupil working. Anybody in medicine knows that's a horrible picture. And I'm certain I didn't see him with my eyes or hear him with my ears because my brain and sensory systems and all that were far too damaged by the meningitis.
And when you look back at your body on the bed, there's an instant, like it's instant, that you realize, okay, that's not me, that's the vehicle that I'm using. Believe that this is a hallucination or dream. I want to state this. I spent, I would say, about 3 years trying to disprove myself that this isn't real. And this is why I started to do experiments to show and prove to myself, is this actually hallucination? This is why I started targeting things. I started seeing people do things in real time, like seeing friends do things that I could never know unless I was physically there. Impossible for me to know, even to the exact things that they said, TV shows that they were watching.
We enter into another state of existence or another state of consciousness that is so extraordinarily different from the spatial and temporal frame of reality in which we exist in the physical world, that the language we have is not yet adequate to describe this other state of existence or consciousness.
Maybe the body is just a vessel, something we wear for a while. And when we step beyond it, we don't disappear. We expand into something greater, into a deeper truth we've always known.
The peace and love in near-death experiences is described as unearthly. When they have that as part of their near-death experiences, outside of anything they ever knew, in its intensity, how it envelops them, that's what's so exciting to people that have this. They didn't even know they could feel that in their life. And so it's not surprising that when they return to their body and recover from that close brush with death, that they try to bring that peace of heaven into their life in other ways when they interact with other people.
I became aware that I was surrounded by other beings, and these other beings were here to help me and to welcome me and to comfort me on the other side. And one of them was my dad. And my dad and I had a turbulent relationship while I was growing up. But on the other side, all I felt from my dad was this beautiful, pure, unconditional love.
When we were reviewing my life, we were laughing at, Andy, you spent so much of your time on all these planets being too serious. Life is to be enjoyed. That's why you've come to the various planets, to experience what you can experience in the light, because in the light, there are no highs and lows. There are no fat and thin. There is no light and day. It's all unconditional love.
Almost all people that have had a glimpse beyond the veil of death and have had some encounter with what we as Latter-day Saints would call the spirit world, or as Emanuel Swedenborg would call heaven, or my evangelical Christian friends would call heaven. But almost all of them speak of the overpowering, overwhelming, all-encompassing, all-consuming sense of love.
The very next thing that I felt was a tremendous amount of love. Love that even, I get emotional even talking about it today. It was the most pure, unconditional love I have ever experienced in my life. You know, it was love for me that no matter what I had ever done in my life, what I had ever been through, it was just pure and unconditional love for me. The closest I've ever come to that feeling of love on earth is when my daughter was first born, and I had her after my NDE. The first time she was handed to me and the first time that I held her, I remember looking in her eyes and she was looking in my eyes, and that love that I felt for her and that I could feel that she felt for me, that her soul could feel for me, it was very pure and it was very unconditional. The love in the light is even bigger and deeper than that.
I was this huge expanded balloon, this cloud, and I was absolutely euphoric. It felt like honey was running through my brain and down every nerve, and it was just a standing wave of ecstasy. That's how good it felt. And you know, this words like nirvana and things like that, that's what we have to look forward to. Let's just say that's where we come from.
We are so loved. It's hard to imagine what it's like. It's like having kids, how much you love your own kids. But for some reason on this side, on the earth plane, we don't feel that. And I think what people feel in their souls and what they miss is that feeling of love on the other side. I didn't want to come back because of that love you feel. Feel so loved, so safe, so not judged.
I felt pure love. I was everything and I was nothing. I was perfect and imperfect and everything else. I was just everything and I was nothing.
There's no such thing as physicality as we experience in it in this realm. It's not that they have a physical body. It's rather that they have some other sort of vehicle, which they find it very difficult to describe. But that it does have a form, that it carries a personality, but that it's just entirely impossible to describe it in terms of or analogously to the kind of body that we have.
When I was out of my body during my NDE, I was stripped of ego. I was stripped of the limitations of my brain. I was stripped of the limitations of my body. And the light that I was in didn't have any of those limitations either. And so there was enough room for this complete, deep, unconditional, pure love. I had this realization that is me also, that I am that love, that we human beings, we are that love. Every soul is that love because we are one with that light as well. It's just when we come into our bodies and onto planet Earth, we get that what's perceived as a separation, but the separation, it's just an illusion.
People on the boundary of death, very often declared dead and then pulled back, they describe experiences. We've been able to classify them. They have a structure to them very often. They appear to happen at a point in time when it at least appears scientifically that the brain is not functioning.
We simply couldn't get him off the heart-lung machine. Finally, we just had to give up, pronounce him dead. It had been at least 20 minutes that this man recorded no heartbeat, no blood pressure. He recovered. And he talked about the bright light at the end of the tunnel. Thing that astounded me was that he described that operating room floating around and saying, I saw you and Dr. Catania standing in the doorway with your arms folded talking. And I saw all of these Post-its sitting on this TV screen. And what those were any call I got, the nurse would write down who called and the phone number and stick it on the... He described that. I mean, there's no way he could have described that before the operation because they didn't have any calls.
He must have been floating.
He was up there.
Yeah.
He described the scene, things that there is no way he knew.
When the billions of other pieces of the light said, Andy, welcome home, I was absorbed into the light. I didn't go into the light. I was absorbed into the light. And it was like if the light was a large glass of water, and if Andy was a teaspoon of sugar, and you put the sugar in the water and spin it around, and then look at it, where's Andy? Everywhere. Where's the light? Everywhere. I became the light. I was not greater than the light. I was not lesser than the light. I was a holographic piece of the light.
Near-death experiences in a very small group of people, not the ordinary ones down the tunnel, being of light, relatives, all that. Not that. It's the people who go beyond that. And I got some very nice examples of that, where they go through a stage when their form dissolves into energy. So they become part, their words, of universal energy. They move towards a point which is in fact the ground state of the universe with which they are finally going to merge. And so it is in fact that there is the wholeness, the whole thing is consciousness. And people describe how they are refined by the process. You can't do it in this state, obviously. So you go through a period always of refinement, and then the energy reaches a point at which you can start to merge and fuse with the universal energy.
There is life after death. There are relationships after death. There is happiness and fulfillment and meaningful progression. Then it's not fearful. It is anticipation. It is joyful anticipation.
This world, this material world, is vague and dreamy and murky compared to that reality. It was sharp and crystal clear and just really beautiful beyond description.
There were flowers. The colors of the flowers and the beauty of the flowers was not even anything I had ever seen in my life. The closest I can get to it is I went to the Garden of Eden in Maui, and the flowers that were there, I was just in a dream, because it was like being back there in some way, some of the flowers, but really they were just unbelievably beautiful, and they went on forever. And the colors are like the most vibrant of color you could imagine. Nothing like we have here. Everything is dulled down, but everything, even the blades of grass, pulsate. Everything is live on the other side. It's phenomenal.
Every near-death experience, when they die, whether it's in a hospital bed, when they come out of their body, they're viewing the whole scene of their death. The out-of-body state is no different because you're doing the same process. You are observing all of that as well, wherever you are. And you can access a lot more too. So it's not a hallucination of the mind. These are things that science or powers that be would want people to believe because they want to disconnect you from your true state. Because once you realize that your soul, who you actually are, your true essence of who you are, it changes your whole life forever.
There were these tunnels, these doorways that also went down as far as you could see. And right in front of those tunnels there were marble tables, and there were 2 people sitting at every single table. I found out that these people are orientation counselors. Their whole job was to help people, and again, I don't know how this works. I just saw it. They come through these tunnels after they finish their lifetime here on Earth. They go through the tunnel, and you've heard probably a lot of times when people are in the tunnel, they see a white light at the end of the tunnel. Well, what that white light is it's the light that's coming from the other side that shines into these tunnels, which leads people to the other side. So the minute that they walk into that light, they're stepping into the orientation center. And so this woman, one of the counselors, she stood up, she walked over and she took this one of the guys had come through the tunnel. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had his right hand clutching his heart. And my guide said he died from a heart attack. So he came to the tunnel. This counselor stood up. She walked over and she took his hands in hers and she led him back to the table, and they sat down. Well, the entire time she was talking to him, she was holding his hands. And my guide said, "Watch him carefully." So I was watching him, and as she was talking to him, he began to change. He changed from a man in his 80s or 90s to a man in his 30s. And I don't know why this is, but everybody on the other side is in their 30s. So what happened, the orientation counselor was telling him, you had just finished your lifetime. Now you came back home. This is the real world.
I watched humans standing together as family, and there were virtual books coming at them, or pamphlets, or I didn't know what virtual was at the time, but I say that virtual now because they were moving. And I watched them come in front of them, and these families were deciding what they were going to do. And I was hearing them say, I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to go through that, and I'm going to have this happen and that happen. And my soul's going to grow and expand so much, and I was just seeing this interaction going on. And I heard this guide, I believe, or angelic being, say to them, oh, no, that's too much. That's way too much. I call that today the PhD in hardship, which I know I chose.
These visions, so consistent, so transformative, hint at something universal, a shared reality beyond the physical, something that may be waiting for all of us, just beyond this life.
We all are a facet and an expression of the universe or divinity, every single one of us. Your soul came here with an intention. It came here with a purpose. But unless you allow it to fulfill its purpose, it can't do that. How do you allow it? You allow it by embracing it for who it is and not trying to change it to be someone it's not. You allow it by embracing yourself to be all of who you are and not trying to be someone that everyone else wants you to be.
Where you are in each moment, that is your purpose. And there's a lot of peace in knowing that. If you're having a bad day, or if you're having a good day, if you yelled at your kids that day, or if you had a great day with your kids that day, you are always in your soul's purpose, because we are here to learn. We are not meant to be perfect every single day to fit the definition of being in your soul's purpose. We're all learning, we're all evolving, we're all progressing along our path.
What we do is we put great importance on the past and on the future. And we focus so much on those two things. That's where our importance is. But the value is here, right now. And getting out of those boundaries of time allowed me to put the importance where the value is and where I am right now, the people I'm with right now. The gift of death is teaching the ability to let go and to be alive. I mean, what's the point of music? The point of music is to listen. What's the point of life? The point of life is to live. And that really helped me come to grips with who I am as a husband, a father, a human, my place on the planet.
When you pull back, you can see that we are all part of a grand tapestry. We're all threads that are very interwoven, and each of us is uniquely, utterly important. We all serve a very important purpose, and we're all meshing together and creating something very beautiful.
We come here to be tested, to be tested in those low vibrational emotions that collectively we call fear. You know, things like anxiety and anger and jealousy. And there's a big long list of them, but they stay here and they don't exist where we come from. And we come in here to take a ride in the spook house with those emotions and to see what we learn from them.
The light said, Andy, remember, everything on the planet is an illusion. It isn't real. Reality is in the light. When you're on Earth, it's like being in a Broadway play, and there are 8 billion actors, and everybody's doing their part, but that's not reality. Reality only exists in the light.
These messages aren't just personal. They echo across culture, belief, and language. They're reminders from the edge of life that we are not alone, and that love is the lesson behind it all.
I'd grown up thinking life's a test and I'm going to be judged, and I'm holding my little boy who died because I wrecked the car. You know, I cut his life short because I lost control or dozed off, and suddenly there felt like there was physical arms that wrapped around and just held us. And then there was this download, this overwhelming communication. And I was told there's nothing to forgive.
As I continued on that other realm, I even met my best friend who had crossed over 2 years prior. My dad had crossed over 10 years prior. So it felt so good to be reunited with people who I had loved and lost.
You could access your deceased loved ones, passed away loved ones, because they're not dead. Nothing dies. Nothing is ever lost. And they are on the other side, creating their own heavens. They're in their own heaven. They're in their own paradise. And so death is not something that should be cried about or it should be celebrated, because they are seeing things and accessing things and back in their true home. It's nothing but bliss there.
What if the ones we've lost never truly leave us? What if they remain just beyond the veil, watching, guiding, loving, Until we meet again. Near-death experiences defy conventional science. They raise a profound question. Is consciousness created by the brain, or merely received through it?
As physicians, we all try to practice this thing called evidence-based medicine, which we need data and proof to treat patients so that they can get the best care possible. And through that, we really pathologize death. We sterilize it. We try to prevent it. We medicalize it, and we shield ourselves from it. Not experiencing death, we've made it so sterile and kept it behind this curtain that we don't get a chance to really experience and celebrate the transformation.
I saw one study where people used electroencephalograms, EEGs, to measure electrical activity in the brain. We can tell how the brain's working fairly well. What they showed was that the brain tends to shut down within 2 or 3 minutes. But many people with NDEs, near-death experiences, are describing events that happen well past that time, when in theory at least there is no electrical activity in the brain. Now that's interesting. What's going on?
And there have been now data collected to test the oxygen hypotheses. Several people have studied oxygen level in people as they are near death. And what they find is that people who report near-death experiences actually have better oxygenation in the brain than people who don't report NDEs. Likewise, we find that people who are given drugs when they are near death tend to report fewer near-death experiences than people who are not given drugs. So it's not the drugs that are causing people to hallucinate.
When you have an out-of-body experience during a near-death experience, then people can have veridical perceptions which you can corroborate. And then they can describe things that happens, like after 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the start of cardiac arrest. And they have sometimes perception. They are sent back to go to the body by a deceased relative. And they're back in the body and say, oh, I don't want to. And they see their own body and they see the nurse coming there, giving the defibrillation. And then they are forced to go back. That is the end of the resuscitation.
In which people with end-stage Alzheimer's or other dementias suddenly become totally lucid in the hours before they die or the days before they die. And there's no medical explanation for how the brain can regenerate at that point. It's like the brain deteriorates so much that the mind is allowed to free itself from the brain and flourish again. So there's strong evidence for the fact that the mind can function when the brain is not. And if that's so, then that opens the possibility that the mind might continue to function when the brain has died, when the body has died.
Part of our survey was to find out from the carers of the dying how many times and how frequently they had seen deathbed visions. Take that one. It was about 60% in the UK, but it was about 75% of carers in Holland.
Neurosurgeons are beginning to accept that long-term memories are not stored in the brain at all. That's one of the final nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience.
Never prove an assumption that consciousness is a product of the function of the brain. That cannot be true.
There have been studies recently of scientists in Scotland, in Belgium, in Brazil, and in the US surveying what these scientists think about the mind and the brain. In each of these studies, about 50% of scientists say that the mind and the brain are separate things, that the mind is not just what the brain does. And that would not have been true if you had asked this 50 years ago.
These areas of science are all nascent. The size of the universe is universal. It's massive. We have a lot yet to understand.
As researchers dig deeper, a new understanding is emerging. Consciousness may not be limited to the body. It may transcend it. What if death is not the end, but a return, not the fading of light, but the remembering of who we truly are?
People that have had that experience or those experiences come back changed, and they are remarkably changed. This wasn't a hallucination or a bad acid trip. This is something that they know is real, that affects them deeply.
I became very uncomfortable with my career pursuit. Those things weren't important to me anymore. I've written a couple of very bad novels, horror novels, but I say that I was the best character I ever created because I was this piece of paper and I couldn't identify with that anymore. Those things weren't important to me. And here I was in this intense Boston, malignant academic environment, and it made me physically ill. I just couldn't be there anymore.
When they come back, they say that the most important thing we can do while we're alive is to learn how to love.
Being is oftentimes all you need. It keeps you from getting in the way all the time, for the beauty that's trying to unfold in your life and the people's lives around you.
When you lose your fear of dying, you also lose your fear of living. You know that death is not terrifying, so you're not afraid of losing your life, so you're more likely to live life to the fullest.
One of the most important things that we can do now and going into the future is to be with nature, to be in the forest, to be in the oceans, to be in the rivers and the lakes, and to really connect with the peacefulness of nature. We're all here for a reason. As more and more of us awaken, as more and more of us realize that our main reason for existing in human form is to love and to spread love and to be peaceful, and that we're here to learn lessons and to grow.
Earth is like being in a war and you're in a foxhole without a radio. We don't have that same connection to God that you feel when you're on the other side. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why that's different. We don't feel that. And I think that's one of the things that people feel in their heart, that they're missing something. And what it is that love of God.
Death is just the death of the physical aspects, but the essence is still there. And death, like birth, is just a changing state of consciousness.
It's true. Nobody ever died. We just dropped the Earth suit, the avatar, and we slipped out of the physical and we've gone home to paradise, to euphoria. You can see those loved ones that have passed and they're on the other side and nobody ever died.
The light says to me, Andy, it's time to go back. It's time to go back. No. I said, no way, I'm not going back. I'm sorry. No, the answer is no. And the light says for the second time, Andy, you're going back. And I said, excuse me, did you hear what I said? I'm staying here, I'm home. Why would I ever want to go back?
The core message I was to bring back to this world: you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for, and you can do no wrong. I was in a realm of such pure love. The most optimal way forward was a way of loving kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness. And that's what I meant by you can do no wrong, because that's what transformed so many near-death experiencers to come back to this world far more loving. They come back more spiritual and yet often less religious.
Our job here is to have that love. Love is the hierarchy, even there. Love is the answer to everything. And it is the more you love, the higher you vibrate. And the goal is to get to that vibration level of source.
There's no death. There's the continuity of the essence of who you are.
You only have to fill yourself, fill your own cup, get to know yourself, be the brightest light you can be, and other people will be lit and helped just by your presence.
When you are walking in the path of love, things start to change for you. Because in love, everything becomes possible in that state. That is the creation point from everything.
In my research of near-death experience, I've absolutely lost my fear of death. I, like the thousands of near-death experiencers that I've investigated, all have come to that same conclusion. We're literally spiritual beings having an earthly existence at this time. When we die, and we all will, then we're going to return to our real home, that spiritual home, which is so often, and I think aptly called heaven. And that is going to be an absolutely wonderful existence for each and every one of us.
We began with a question. What happens when we die? Perhaps the answer is this. Death teaches us how to truly live.